Let's talk about Magazine and a couple of records by these artists. Magazine's a very interesting band. Howard Devoto, who is the vocalist, originally started out playing in a band called the Buzzcocks with Pete Shelley. For those of you who know punk, very interesting punk band. These guys, again, and everybody and their brother in the UK who was into that music scene was clearly influenced by the Sex Pistols. Devoto and Pete Shelley played together, co-wrote the song, I think, Orgasmatic. It was the first single from Buzzcocks. I believe that Devoto ended up leaving the Buzzcocks but remained on friendly terms with Pete Shelley because he thought he was a lot smarter than being able to play in a punk band. He ended up forming a band, forming Magazine, with another really, really important, probably somewhat forgotten character named John McGeoch, an amazing guitar player, an extremely influential guitar player. I'll talk about him in a second. But the two of them, with another guy named Barry Adamson, who has had a very long career in the music business and soundtracks and lots of different things, was the bass player in the band. Interesting band from the perspective that many people now consider that this Real Life record is probably one of the first post-punk albums that was released. And interesting from the perspective that if you ask somebody what's post-punk, you'll probably get 30 different answers on it or more. But it certainly combined a bunch of different things, including the avant-garde, some punk energy, do-it-yourself, focus on incorporating electronics into the music, lots of different things. At the time that this record was released, it was also considered new wave, which today you can probably look at as a bit of a pejorative term. The material on this record was recorded in '77 and released in '78. There were probably two great singles on here, Shot by Both Sides and another one called Definitive Gaze. So there's another classic track on here called The Light Pours Out of Me, which was later covered by Peter Murphy on a solo record. And it's an interesting record from the perspective that it incorporates a lot of the sounds that were happening at the time, but a bit dark. Vocals were a bit unusual. I think that it was a very interesting record. That the second record that these guys ended up doing as well was a record called Secondhand Daylight. Now on this record, it's very interesting because they added more keyboards. If you read some of the reviews from the time, many people criticize it, calling it prog rock and all this type of stuff, but in reality, nothing like it. Again, a much darker record in terms of lyrics, interesting delivery vocally. Musicianship is incredible. John McGeoch, as a guitar player, as I mentioned earlier, was extremely influential in the late 70s and into the 80s. John McGeoch went on to play with many, many different artists at the time, including Susie and the Banshees, including Armory Show. I know many people today loved Johnny Marr. He is one of Johnny Marr's influences and certainly one of his favorites. He's very well known for incorporating guitar effects, especially as something called flanging, which is a sound where the guitar will oscillate somewhat. He ended up leaving Magazine at one point to join Susie and the Banshees. I'm not sure Magazine was ever quite the same and quite recovered. Howard Devoto did go on to have another career in another band called Luxuria and did some other things, participating in other albums. They did Reform at one point. But if you want to look for two really, really interesting records that capture the time period and are extremely influential with regard to certainly post-punk and the scene that was happening in the late 70s, these two records are both classics that are well worth owning.